The blood on his shirt had dried to a rust-brown stain that spread across his ribs like a grotesque flower. And when Wyatt Dawson stumbled through the door of the only seamstress shop in Fort Kearny, Nebraska, clutching the torn fabric to his side, Grace Dalton looked up from her sewing table and felt her heart skip a beat at the sight of this stranger who seemed more ghost than man. It was July of 1867, and the summer heat hung heavy in the air like a wool blanket. The afternoon sun filtered through the shop's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness. Grace had been working on Mrs. Henderson's Sunday dress, her needle moving in practiced rhythm through the pale blue cotton when the cowboy's shadow fell across her threshold. "I need help," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Not with the wound. That is already stitched. But this shirt is the only one I have that is not completely threadbare." Grace set down her work and rose from her chair, smoothing her hands over her apron. She was 22 years old, with dark auburn hair she kept pinned in a simple bun at the nape of her neck, and eyes the color of spring moss. Her father had been the town's tailor before consumption took him 2 years prior, and she had inherited both his shop and his skill with a needle. "Let me see it," she said, crossing to where Wyatt stood swaying slightly in the doorway. He was perhaps 25, she guessed, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat at harvest time. His eyes were a startling blue, pale as ice, and they held a weariness that spoke of long miles and hard living. He wore dusty leather chaps over denim trousers, and his boots were scuffed beyond repair. When he carefully peeled off the ruined shirt, she could see the fresh pink scar that crossed his ribs, the stitches still intact. "Bar fight in Omaha," he explained, seeing her gaze. "The doctor there did good work, but my shirt did not fare as well." Grace took the garment from his hands, her fingers brushing against his calloused ones for just a moment. The shirt was simple homespun cotton, once white, but now faded to cream with age and sun. The tear ran from the bottom hem up past the buttons, and the bloodstain would need special attention. "I can mend this," she said. "It will take a few hours. The blood will need soaking first." Wyatt nodded, then seemed to realize he was standing shirtless in a lady's shop. A flush crept up his neck. "I apologize for my state of undress, miss. I have a clean undershirt on my horse." "Go fetch it," Grace said, fighting back a smile at his sudden bashfulness. "You can wait here while I work if you have nowhere else to be." He returned a moment later wearing a thin cotton undershirt that had seen better days, and settled himself on the wooden bench near the window. Grace filled a basin with cool water and added a measure of salt, submerging the blood-stained portion of the shirt. While it soaked, she returned to Mrs. Henderson's dress, but she found herself acutely aware of the cowboy's presence, the way he sat quietly watching the street outside, the way his hands rested on his knees. "You are new to Fort Kearny," she said after a while. It was not a question. "Passing through," Wyatt replied. "I have been driving cattle north from Texas. We delivered the herd to Omaha, and now I am heading back. Thought I would take a different route, see some new country. Alone. I prefer it that way." There was something in his voice that discouraged further questions, so Grace let the silence settle between them. She worked on the dress for another hour while the blood soaked free from the shirt. Outside, the sounds of Fort Kearny went about their business. Wagon wheels creaking, horses whinnying, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. The town had grown up around the old military fort, serving travelers on the Oregon Trail and later the railroad workers pushing westward. It was a place of transience, where people came and went like seasons, and Grace had learned not to grow too attached to anyone who had that restless look in their eyes. But when she finally lifted Wyatt's shirt from the basin and began to work the stain with a brush and lye soap, She found herself thinking about the man sitting behind her, wondering what had put that shadow in his gaze. The stain proved stubborn. She changed the water twice, working patiently until at last the fabric came clean. Then she hung it near the window to dry while she threaded her needle with careful precision. "You do not have to stay," she told Wyatt. "I can have this ready by tomorrow morning." "I've got nowhere else to be," he said, "and I find it peaceful watching someone work who knows what they are doing." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. She settled into her chair with the damp shirt and began to work on the tier. Her father had taught her that mending was an art as much as making new. The goal was not just to close the gap, but to make the repair so neat, so carefully matched to the original stitching, that one could barely tell the fabric had ever been torn. She selected thread that matched the shirt's weave, then began with tiny, precise stitches, working from the inside so the repair would be nearly invisible from the outside. Her needle flashed in the afternoon light, pulling the edges together, making whole what had been broken. As she worked, Wyatt began to talk. Perhaps it was the quiet of the shop, or the rhythmic motion of her sewing, but words seemed to flow from him like water from a long-stopped spring. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about how his parents had died of fever when he was 16, leaving him and his younger sister alone. He had worked odd jobs for 2 years to keep food on their table until his sister married a shopkeeper and moved to St. Louis. Then Wyatt had drifted west, hiring on with a cattle outfit in Texas, learning the trade of driving longhorns north to market. "It is a hard life," he said, "but honest. And there is something about being on the trail under all that sky that makes a man feel small and large at the same time. Small because the land goes on forever, and large because you are part of it, moving through it like blood through veins." Grace listened, her hands never stopping their work. She understood about hard lives and honest work. After her father died, several men in town had offered to buy the shop, assuming a young woman could not run a business alone. She had proven them wrong through sheer stubbornness and skill, building a reputation for quality work that kept customers coming back. "What about you?" Wyatt asked. "Have you always lived in Fort Kearny, born here?" Grace said. "My mother died bringing me into the world, so it was just my father and me. He taught me everything he knew about sewing and tailoring, said skill was something no one could take away from you. He was right about that." She smiled, pulling the thread taut. "He was right about many things. He always said that the way a person mends something tells you about their character. Anyone can slap a patch on a tier and call it fixed, but taking the time to do it right to make it beautiful again, that shows care." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. That is a good philosophy. The afternoon stretched into evening. Grace lit a lamp as the shadows grew long and continued her careful work. The tier was nearly closed now, the edges coming together as neatly as if they had never been parted. She found herself taking extra care, making each stitch perfect, and she wondered at the impulse even as she indulged it. There was something about this cowboy that called to her. Perhaps it was the loneliness she sensed in him, a loneliness that matched her own. Or perhaps it was simply the way he looked at her when she spoke, as if her words truly mattered to him. When she finally tied off the last stitch and bit the thread free, the sun had set, and stars were emerging in the darkening sky. She held up the shirt, examining her work in the lamplight. The repair was invisible, the fabric whole once more. "It is done," she said, rising to show Wyatt. He stood and took the shirt from her hands, running his fingers over where the tier had been. His eyes widened slightly. "I cannot even tell where it was damaged." "This is remarkable work, Miss Dalton. Grace," she said. "Please call me Grace, Grace." He said her name like it was something precious. "I am Wyatt Dawson. "I know," she said. "You told me when you came in." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, chasing away the shadows. "So I did. What do I owe you for this?" Grace named a fair price, and Wyatt paid without hesitation, adding an extra $1. "For staying past your normal hours," he explained. "That is not necessary. I insist." They stood there in the lamplight, neither quite ready for him to leave. Finally, Wyatt cleared his throat. "Would it be forward of me to ask if I could buy you supper? As thanks for the excellent work." Grace knew she should say no. She knew this man would be gone in a day or two, riding back to Texas and his life on the trail. She knew better than to let her heart get tangled up with a drifter. But when she looked at him, at the hope and uncertainty in those pale blue eyes, she found herself saying yes. They walked together through the warm summer night to the boarding house where Mrs. Murphy served meals. The dining room was half full with travelers and townspeople, and they found a small table near the back. Mrs. Murphy brought them beef stew and fresh bread, and they ate and talked as the evening deepened around them. Wyatt told her about the cattle drives, about nights spent under stars so thick they looked like scattered salt, about the satisfaction of delivering a herd successfully after months on the trail. Grace told him about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, about how a well-made dress or shirt could make someone stand taller, feel more themselves. "You put a piece of yourself into everything you make," Wyatt observed. "I suppose I do," Grace admitted. "My father used to say that sewing was a way of caring for people. Every stitch is a small act of service." "I felt that," Wyatt said quietly. "When you handed me the shirt, I could feel the care you put into it." It sounds strange, maybe, but it felt like the shirt was whole again in more than just the fabric. Like you had mended something deeper. Grace felt her breath catch. She had never had someone understand that before, the way she poured her heart into her work. It does not sound strange at all. They talked until Mrs. Murphy began clearing tables and giving them pointed looks. Then they walked slowly back through the quiet streets to Grace's shop. She lived in 2 rooms above it, accessed by an outside staircase. "Thank you for supper," she said when they reached her door. "And for the company." "Thank you for fixing my shirt," Wyatt replied, "and for the conversation. It has been a long time since I talked to someone like this." "Like what?" "Like they truly wanted to hear what I had to say." Grace understood that feeling all too well. In a small town, everyone thought they knew everything about you, and genuine curiosity was rare. "Will you be leaving tomorrow?" Wyatt hesitated. "I had planned to, but I find myself wanting to stay a bit longer, see more of Fort Kearny." He paused, then added with that transforming smile, "See more of you if you would allow it." "I would like that," Grace said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long while. He bid her good night then, and she climbed the stairs to her rooms with her heart beating faster than usual. She told herself not to be foolish, that this could lead nowhere good, but the warning seemed distant and unimportant compared to the memory of Wyatt's smile. The next morning, Grace woke early as always and went downstairs to open the shop. She had 3 projects waiting: Mrs. Henderson's dress to finish, a suit jacket for the banker that needed new buttons, and a christening gown for the doctor's new granddaughter. She set to work on the dress, but found her mind wandering to the cowboy, wondering if he would truly stay, or if last night had been just pleasant words that the morning light would dispel. She had her answer just before noon, when Wyatt appeared at her door carrying a basket. "I brought lunch," he said, looking almost shy. "If you have time to take a break." Grace's face broke into a smile. "I always have time for lunch." They ate together in the shop, sitting on the bench by the window. The basket held fried chicken, biscuits, and fresh cherries, all purchased from Mrs. Murphy's kitchen. They talked and laughed, and Grace found herself relaxing in a way she had not in years. Over the next week, Wyatt became a fixture at the shop. He would arrive in the mornings and sit quietly while she worked, sometimes reading a newspaper, sometimes just watching her sew. At midday they would eat together, and in the evenings they would walk through town or sit on the bench outside the shop, talking as the stars emerged. Grace learned that Wyatt was more educated than his rough appearance suggested. His mother had been a schoolteacher, and she had made sure both her children could read and write and cipher. He carried a battered copy of Walt Whitman's poems in his saddlebag, and he would sometimes read to Grace while she worked, his voice giving music to the words. Wyatt learned that Grace had a wry sense of humor that surprised him, and that she could discuss everything from philosophy to politics with a sharp intelligence. She had continued her education after her father died, reading every book she could borrow, refusing to let her mind grow dull. The townspeople noticed, of course. In a place like Fort Kearny, everything was noticed and commented upon. Mrs. Henderson made pointed remarks about cowboys who lingered when they should be riding on. The banker's wife suggested that Grace was setting herself up for heartbreak. But Grace ignored them all, storing up these days with Wyatt like a squirrel storing nuts for winter, knowing they could not last but unable to deny herself the joy of them. On the 8th day, Wyatt took her to the river. It was Sunday, and the shop was closed. They rode out on his horse, Grace sitting behind him with her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him and the power of the animal beneath them. The Platte River ran wide and shallow, glinting in the sunlight, and they found a spot beneath a cottonwood tree where the grass grew thick. Grace had packed a picnic, and they spread a blanket and ate cold ham and bread and apples. Afterward, they lay side by side looking up through the leaves at the sky, not touching but so close Grace could feel the heat radiating from Wyatt's body. "I should go," Wyatt said after a long while. "I have been here more than a week. People are expecting me back in Texas." "I know," Grace said, though her heart contracted at the words, "but I do not want to." She turned her head to look at him. He was staring up at the leaves, his jaw tight. "Why did you become a cowboy, truly?" she asked. "It cannot just be because you like sleeping under the stars." Wyatt was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "After my sister married, I felt unmoored. Like I had no place to be, no one who needed me. The trail gave me purpose. Each drive had a beginning and an end, a clear goal. I knew what was expected of me. And now I find myself wanting something different, wanting to stay in one place if it was the right place, if I had a reason to stay." Grace's heart was hammering now. "What kind of reason?" Wyatt rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. His pale blue eyes were intense, searching her face. "A reason like you, Grace Dalton. This week with you has felt more like home than anywhere I have been in 9 years. When I watch you work, when I listen to you talk, when I make you laugh, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." "Wyatt," she whispered. "I know it is fast," he continued. "I know people will say I am crazy, that we barely know each other. But I feel like I have known you forever. Like every mile I rode, every herd I drove was leading me here to you." Grace reached up and touched his face, running her fingers along his jaw. "I feel it too. From the moment you walked into my shop, bleeding and stubborn, I felt something shift inside me. And every day since, that feeling has grown stronger." "Then let me stay," Wyatt said. "Let me find work here, build a life here. Let me court you properly the way you deserve. What about the trail? What about Texas? I will send word that I am not coming back. There are plenty of cowboys looking for work, but there is only one you." Grace pulled him down to her then, and they kissed for the first time there under the cottonwood tree, with the river singing past and the summer sun warm on their skin. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and possibility, and when they broke apart, both were smiling. "Yes," Grace said. "Stay. Court me. Let us see where this leads." Wyatt stayed that night at the boarding house, but the next morning he went to see Mr. Patterson, who owned the largest ranch outside Fort Kearny. Patterson was always looking for experienced hands, and when Wyatt told him about his years on the trail, the rancher hired him on the spot. "I will need you to help with the fall roundup," Patterson said, "and I could use someone who knows cattle the way you do. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board." Wyatt accepted, and just like that, he became a resident of Fort Kearny rather than a drifter passing through. The courtship that followed was the talk of the town. Wyatt would ride in from the Patterson ranch every Sunday, and he and Grace would attend church together, then spend the afternoon walking or riding or simply sitting in her shop while she worked, and he read to her. He was unfailingly respectful, always leaving before dark, always mindful of her reputation, but the connection between them deepened with each passing week. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions and complementary differences. Wyatt admired Grace's independence and sharp mind. Grace loved Wyatt's quiet strength and the gentleness that lived beneath his weathered exterior. In September, 3 months after Wyatt first walked into her shop, he asked her to marry him. They were at the river again, their special place, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have not got much to offer," Wyatt said, holding both her hands in his. "Just my wages and my work, but I love you, Grace. I love your intelligence and your kindness and the way you pour your heart into everything you do. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Wyatt Dawson." He produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing I have of hers. I had it resized in town." Grace slipped it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. She looked at this man who had stumbled into her life with a torn shirt and a wounded side, and she marveled at how completely he had captured her heart. They were married in October, when the leaves on the cottonwoods had turned to gold. The wedding was small, held in the church with most of the town in attendance. Grace wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Wyatt wore a new suit that Grace had tailored for him, the stitches so perfect they were invisible. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Wyatt kissed her in front of the whole congregation, Grace felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This man was her home now, and she was his. They moved into the rooms above the shop, which were small but comfortable. Wyatt continued working for Patterson, but he also began helping Grace with the heavier aspects of running the business, moving bolts of fabric, repairing the shop's roof, building additional shelving. In the evenings, they would sit together while Grace sewed and Wyatt read aloud, the lamplight warm around them. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with blizzards that buried the town under feet of snow. But Grace and Wyatt barely noticed the cold. They kept each other warm, learning the rhythms of married life, discovering the deep satisfaction of building something together. Grace taught Wyatt the finer points of sewing, and he proved surprisingly adept with a needle. He began helping her with simple repairs, freeing her time for the more complex projects. Wyatt taught Grace to ride better, and on clear Sundays they would go out to the ranch where he worked, and he would show her the cattle, explain the work of managing a herd. In February, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Wyatt one evening as they sat by the fire, and the joy on his face was so pure it made her heart ache. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could see he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Wyatt said, pulling her into his arms. "I feel like the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Grace continued working in the shop until her belly grew too large to sit comfortably at her sewing table. Wyatt fussed over her constantly, bringing her water, insisting she rest, building a cradle with his own hands from smooth pine. On a warm September evening, almost exactly a year after Wyatt had proposed, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Murphy and the doctor were summoned, and Wyatt paced outside the bedroom door for 6 hours while Grace labored to bring their child into the world. When the baby's first cry split the air, Wyatt nearly broke down the door in his eagerness to get to his wife. The doctor admitted him with a smile, and Wyatt rushed to Grace's side. She was pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling as she held a small bundle wrapped in a blanket Grace had sewn during her pregnancy. "A son," she said. "We have a son, Wyatt." Wyatt looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. "He is beautiful," he whispered. They named him Thomas after Grace's father and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and both parents fell completely in love with him. Wyatt would hold him for hours, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the way the baby would grasp his finger with surprising strength. As Tommy grew, the shop grew as well. Grace's reputation for quality work had spread beyond Fort Kearny, and people would travel from neighboring towns to commission dresses and suits. She had to hire an assistant, a young woman named Sarah, whose family had recently settled in the area. With Sarah handling the simpler repairs and alterations, Grace could focus on the fine work she loved best: wedding dresses and christening gowns, tailored suits and intricate embroidery. And in the evenings, she would hold Tommy while Wyatt read to them both, the baby's eyes growing heavy as his father's voice washed over them like a lullaby. When Tommy was 2, Patterson made Wyatt a foreman, acknowledging his skill and dedication. The promotion came with a significant raise and a small house on the ranch property. Wyatt talked it over with Grace, and together they decided to stay in town. The shop was Grace's livelihood, and they both loved the rooms above it, which had become truly home. "Besides," Grace said, "I want our children to grow up here in town where they will have the school and the church and other children to play with." "Children?" Wyatt asked, raising an eyebrow. "Plural?" Grace smiled. "I hope so. I always wanted a large family, did you not?" "I want whatever makes you happy," Wyatt said, kissing her forehead. "If you want 10 children, we will have 10 children." They did not have 10, but they did have 4 more over the next 8 years. After Tommy came Margaret, called Maggie, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. Then came James, who was quieter than his siblings, preferring books to rough play. Then twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, who were born during a thunderstorm and seemed to carry that wildness in their spirits. The house above the shop grew crowded but happy. Wyatt built bunk beds for the boys and a partition to give the girls their own space. Grace taught all the children to sew as soon as they were old enough to hold a needle safely, and Wyatt taught them to ride and to work with their hands. Tommy, as the eldest, showed a particular aptitude for tailoring. By the time he was 10, he could set a sleeve as neatly as his mother. Grace began to hope he might take over the business one day, though she was careful not to pressure him. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Fort Kearny continued to expand as the railroad brought more settlers west. Grace's shop remained a cornerstone of the community, and Wyatt became known as one of the finest cattlemen in the territory. But their true wealth was in each other, and in the family they had built. On their 10th anniversary, Wyatt took Grace back to the river, to the cottonwood tree where he had proposed. The children were spending the day with Mrs. Murphy, who had become like a grandmother to them. Wyatt and Grace sat on a blanket in the same spot, watching the water slide past. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Giving up the trail, settling down?" Wyatt turned to look at her, his pale blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been the day they met. "Not for a single moment. You are my trail now, Grace. You and our children. Every day with you is an adventure. Even when the twins are fighting and Tommy is sulking and Maggie will not stop talking and James has his nose in a book, and I am so tired I can barely see straight," Wyatt laughed. "Especially then. That is real life, Grace. That is what I was missing all those years I spent drifting. I thought I wanted freedom, but what I really wanted was purpose. You gave me that. You and the children are my purpose." Grace leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I am so glad you walked into my shop that day," she said quietly. "So am I." "Best decision I ever made, getting into that bar fight." She swatted his arm playfully. "Do not even joke about that. You could have been killed. But I was not. I was led to you." He paused, then added, "Do you know what I remember most clearly about that day?" "What?" "The way you looked at my shirt when I gave it to you. Like it was not just a torn piece of fabric, but something worth saving. Something worth the effort to make whole again." He turned her face up to his. "You did that for me too, you know. You took this torn, drifting man and you mended me. You stitched your heart into me, thread by thread, until I was whole again." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I felt it the moment I saw you. I cannot explain it, but I knew you were meant to be mine. And I felt it when you handed me the shirt, all mended and perfect. I felt the care you had put into it, the love in every stitch. I felt you, Grace, even before I knew you." They kissed there under the cottonwood tree, the same tree that had sheltered them 10 years before, and the kiss held all the love and commitment and shared history of their decade together. The years continued their steady march. Tommy did indeed take over the shop when he turned 18, showing not just his mother's skill but also his father's head for business. He expanded the operation, hiring more assistants, taking on commercial contracts with the railroad and the military fort. Maggie married a young lawyer who had come to Fort Kearny to set up practice, and they gave Grace and Wyatt their first grandchildren, twin boys who were as wild as their aunts had been. James became a teacher, carrying on his grandmother's profession in a way, educating the children of Fort Kearny in the schoolhouse. The twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, both married ranchers and moved to neighboring counties, but they visited often with their growing families. Grace and Wyatt grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines, but their love only deepening with time. They had weathered hard seasons and lean years together. They had nursed each other through illnesses and supported each other through losses. When Wyatt's sister died in St. Louis, Grace held him while he grieved. When a fire destroyed half the shop, Wyatt helped rebuild it bigger and better. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. The party was held at Tommy's house, which was larger than the rooms above the shop. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight. At one point, Tommy stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. You taught us the value of hard work and the importance of family. You taught us to take care of the things we love, to mend what is broken, to build what needs building. Everything we are, we owe to you." Grace and Wyatt stood together, their hands clasped, as their family toasted them. Looking around the room at the children and grandchildren, at the life they had built from that chance meeting 30 years ago, Grace felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, back in their rooms above the shop, which they had kept even after Tommy took over the business, Grace and Wyatt sat by the window looking out at the stars. "I have been thinking about that shirt," Grace said. "What shirt?" "The first one. The one you came in with, all torn and bloody." "I still have it," Wyatt said. "It is in the trunk at the foot of the bed." Grace turned to look at him in surprise. "You kept it all these years, of course. That shirt changed my life. When I put it on after you mended it, I felt different, whole. Like I had been given a second chance." He smiled. "I kept it to remind me of the day I found you." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. After 30 years, this man could still surprise her, still touch her heart in new ways. "I love you, Wyatt Dawson," she said. "I love you, Grace Dawson," he replied. "I loved you the moment I felt your heart in the stitches of that shirt, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They sat together in the lamplight, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family through love and hard work and dedication. The shop below them was quiet, waiting for tomorrow's customers. The town around them slept peacefully. And in the sky above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to the love story that had unfolded beneath them. Grace thought about all the garments she had mended over the years, all the torn fabric she had made whole again. But the most important mending she had ever done was that first shirt, that simple piece of homespun cotton that had brought Wyatt into her life. She had stitched her heart into every thread, not knowing she was doing it, not understanding the magic she was working, and Wyatt had felt it. He had felt her love even before he knew her name, had recognized in her careful stitches the promise of home and healing and hope. It was, Grace thought, the perfect metaphor for their marriage. They had both come to each other torn in different ways, and they had mended each other, thread by careful thread, until they were both whole and strong and complete. As they climbed into bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 30 years, Grace whispered, "Thank you for being torn that day. Thank you for coming to my shop." Wyatt kissed her forehead. "Thank you for mending me. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Grace said. "I will always choose you." And in the morning, they would rise and go about their day, tending to the business of living, surrounded by the family and community they had built. But for now, in the quiet darkness, they simply held each other, two hearts beating as one, bound together by love and time and a shirt that had been torn and made whole again, just like them. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring gave way to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter, and winter back to spring again. Grace and Wyatt grew older still, moving a bit slower, their hands not quite as steady as they once were. But their love remained constant, a fixed point in a changing world. When they were both well into their 60s, Wyatt decided to retire from the ranch. He had trained a young man to take his place as foreman, and Patterson, now elderly himself, blessed the decision. "You have given me 35 years of loyal service," the rancher said, shaking Wyatt's hand. "You have earned your rest." But Wyatt did not rest, not really. He spent his days helping Tommy in the shop, doing the alterations and repairs that did not require the finest stitching. He liked being useful, liked the rhythm of the work, and he especially liked working alongside his son and sometimes his grandchildren who would stop by after school. Grace had slowed down as well, her eyes not as sharp as they once were, her fingers occasionally stiff with arthritis. But she still did the work she loved, the intricate embroidery and fine tailoring that required a master's touch. And she still poured her heart into every stitch, just as she always had, one spring morning, Grace woke feeling tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Wyatt noticed immediately the way he always noticed everything about her. "Are you unwell?" he asked, concerned. "Just tired," Grace said. "I think I will rest today." It was so unlike her to take a day off that Wyatt insisted on fetching the doctor. Dr. Morrison, who had delivered all 5 of Grace's children and most of her grandchildren, examined her thoroughly. "Your heart is not as strong as it should be," he told them gently. "You need to rest, Grace. No more long days at the sewing table. No more pushing yourself." Grace nodded, accepting this limitation as she had accepted all the others that came with age. Wyatt, however, was devastated. He could see the road ahead clearly now, could see the day when he would have to say goodbye to this woman who was the other half of his soul. But he did not let Grace see his fear. Instead, he dedicated himself to making every day they had left together count. He would help her down the stairs each morning and settle her in a comfortable chair by the window, where she could watch the street and still feel part of the life of the town. He would bring her tea and read to her from their old favorites, his voice still strong even if his body was not. On good days, Grace would do a bit of embroidery, simple work that did not tax her. On bad days, she would simply sit and remember, her mind wandering back through the years of their life together. One afternoon, she asked Wyatt to bring her that first shirt, the one he had kept all these years. He retrieved it from the trunk and brought it to her. The fabric was yellowed with age now, the stitches she had put in so carefully still holding strong. Grace ran her fingers over the repair, marveling at her younger self's work. "I was so careful," she murmured, "so precise. I wanted it to be perfect." "It was perfect," Wyatt said, kneeling beside her chair. "It is perfect, just like you." "I am far from perfect, Wyatt Dawson, and you know it. You are perfect for me. You have always been perfect for me." Grace smiled and touched his face, the face she knew as well as her own, every line and weathered plane beloved and familiar. "And you are perfect for me, my cowboy who felt my heart in the stitches." They sat together in the afternoon light, holding the shirt between them, this tangible reminder of where their story had begun. Grace lived for 2 more years, her heart gradually weakening despite the doctor's best efforts and Wyatt's devoted care. But they were good years, full of visits from children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, full of quiet moments and tender mercies. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when Wyatt had first walked into her shop, Grace felt the end approaching. Wyatt was beside her, holding her hand, and their children were gathered around the bed. "I need you all to promise me something," Grace said, her voice weak but clear. "Promise me you will take care of each other. Promise me you will remember that love is the most important thing, the only thing that really matters in the end." They all promised, tears streaming down their faces. Grace turned her gaze to Wyatt. "And you, my darling man, you need to promise me you will keep living. Do not hide away up here grieving. Stay connected to the children and the grandchildren. Keep working in the shop if it makes you happy. Keep reading your poetry. Keep living." "I do not know how to live without you," Wyatt said, his voice breaking. "You will find a way. You are strong. You have always been strong." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "And I will be with you, Wyatt. In every shirt you mend, in every sunset you watch, in every memory we made together, I will be with you." As the sun set, and the room filled with golden light, Grace Dalton drew her last breath, surrounded by the family she had loved and nurtured for 42 years. Her hand was clasped in Wyatt's, and the last thing she saw was his face, the love in his pale blue eyes as bright and true as it had been the day they met. Wyatt kept his promise, though it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He continued working in the shop alongside Tommy, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. He spent time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive. On Sundays, he would ride out to the river, to the cottonwood tree that had witnessed so many important moments in their life together. He would sit there for hours, talking to Grace as if she could hear him, telling her about the week's events, about the children and their accomplishments. And sometimes, when he held a freshly mended garment, when the stitches were neat and true and made with care, he would swear he could feel her presence, her love stitched into the fabric along with his own. Wyatt lived for 5 more years after Grace died. They were lonely years in some ways, but they were also full of love and family and purpose. He became the patriarch of the Dawson clan, the wise elder who dispensed advice and affection in equal measure. When his time came, it was peaceful. He simply went to sleep one night and did not wake up. They found him in the bed he had shared with Grace for over 4 decades, a smile on his face and clutched in his hand the old homespun shirt with its invisible repair. The family buried him next to Grace in the Fort Kearny cemetery, under a spreading oak tree. The headstone read, "Wyatt Dawson, beloved husband, father, grandfather." He felt the love stitched into every thread. And next to it, Grace's headstone. "Grace Dawson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she mended with her heart." The shop continued under Tommy's care, and eventually under his daughter's care, and then her son's. The Dawson family remained a fixture in Fort Kearny for generations, carrying on the tradition of quality work and heartfelt care that Grace had begun and Wyatt had supported. And sometimes, when the seamstresses and tailors of the Dawson shop worked on a particularly challenging repair, they would pause and think of their ancestors, of the seamstress who had stitched her heart into a cowboy's torn shirt, and the cowboy who had felt it and loved her for it. They would remember that every garment they touched was an opportunity to care for someone, to make something whole again, to pour love into the world one stitch at a time. The story became legend in Fort Kearny, passed down through generations. The tale of the seamstress and the cowboy, whose love had been born from a simple act of mending and had grown into something vast and enduring. Children would hear it and dream of finding love like that. Young couples would invoke it as they married, hoping their love would prove as strong and lasting. But for those who had known Wyatt and Grace personally, who had witnessed their devotion to each other day in and day out for more than 40 years, the story was not a legend. It was simply the truth. It was what love looked like when it was lived authentically, when 2 people chose each other every single day and built a life together through joy and sorrow, through triumph and hardship. The old homespun shirt, the one that had started it all, was preserved as a family heirloom. Each generation would examine it, searching for the invisible repair, marveling at the skill that had made whole what had been torn. But more than the technical expertise, they marveled at the love they could still feel emanating from those careful stitches, love that had transcended time and death, love that had built a legacy. And so the story ends where it began, with a shirt and a seamstress and a cowboy. With torn fabric made whole, with a chance meeting that became a lifetime commitment, with love stitched into every thread, felt across the years, enduring long after the hands that made those stitches had stilled. In the end, it was a simple story, the kind that happens every day in 1,000 different ways. A person with a need meets a person with a skill. A service is rendered. A connection is made. But sometimes, if the hearts are open and the timing is right and the love is true, that simple meeting becomes something more. It becomes a beginning. It becomes a life. It becomes a legacy that echoes through the generations, reminding everyone who hears it that love, real love, the kind that lasts, is built one careful stitch at a time, with patience and skill and a whole heart. Grace had mended Wyatt's shirt with care and precision, not knowing she was also mending his heart, filling the empty places with warmth and hope and belonging. Wyatt had felt that love in the stitches, had recognized it even before he knew her name, and he had chosen to stay, to build a life in the place where his wandering finally ended. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. They had raised children who understood the value of both work and love. They had built a business that served their community with integrity. They had loved each other with a fierce, tender devotion that never wavered, never faltered, even in the face of time's inevitable march. And when their story was told in the years that followed, when parents shared it with children and grandchildren with great-grandchildren, the listeners would understand something fundamental about love, that it is not always loud or dramatic, not always marked by grand gestures and passionate declarations. Sometimes the deepest love is quiet and steady, expressed in small acts of service, in the care taken with a simple repair, in the choice to stay when leaving would be easier, in the commitment to build something together, stitch by careful stitch, until a life is made whole. The seamstress had mended the cowboy's shirt and stitched her heart into every thread. The cowboy had felt it, had recognized it, had cherished it. And from that single act of care, a love story had bloomed that would endure long after both their hearts had stopped beating, carried forward in the memories of their descendants and in the continuing work of the shop that bore their name. In Fort Kearny, Nebraska, on quiet summer evenings when the lights slanted golden through the cottonwood trees and the Platte River sang its eternal song, people would sometimes pause and think of Wyatt and Grace Dawson. They would think about the power of love and the importance of care. They would remember that every act of service, no matter how small, has the potential to change a life. They would recall that the way we mend what is broken says everything about who we are and what we value. And in the shop that still stood on Main Street, where generations of Dawsons had plied their trade, the current seamstresses and tailors would pick up their needles and thread each morning with a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just mending clothes. They were caring for people. They were pouring love into the world. They were honoring the legacy of their ancestors who had understood that every stitch mattered, that quality work was an expression of respect and affection, that the way you mended something revealed the condition of your heart. The story of the seamstress and the cowboy lived on, not as a fairy tale or a myth, but as a testament to the enduring power of love grounded in everyday acts of devotion. It reminded everyone who heard it that the greatest love stories are not always the ones that begin with love at first sight or dramatic rescues. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a simple need and a generous response, with a torn shirt and a skilled seamstress, with a cowboy who was wise enough to feel the love stitched into every thread and brave enough to stay and see where that love might lead. And so, in the fullness of time, in the sweep of years and generations, the story completed its circle. It began with mending and ended with wholeness. It began with two separate people and ended with a legacy of love that touched countless lives. It began with a cowboy stumbling through a door, bleeding and lost, and ended with his descendants carrying forward the values he and his beloved wife had embodied. Integrity, dedication, love, and the understanding that caring for others is the highest calling any person can answer. The seamstress mended his shirt and stitched her heart into every thread. The cowboy felt it. And from that feeling, from that recognition of love offered and received, came everything else. The courtship and the marriage, the children and the grandchildren, the years of partnership and devotion, the legacy that would outlast them both. It was a love story for the ages, proving that the most extraordinary love can grow from the most ordinary circumstances. That magic exists in the everyday acts we so often overlook, and that a heart offered freely, stitched into the work of our hands, will always find its way to the person meant to receive it.